Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Monday, April the 5th, 2021, Easter Monday. Happy Easter to you all. Over the weekend, I saw that Paul Simon was trending on Twitter. And normally, when a man of his age trends on Twitter, that means that he has died. But no, he is still alive. He was trending because someone called Jeff Slate delivered a hit job on him on NBC News in their Think section, opinion, analysis, and essays. Paul Simon sold his catalog to Sony for millions. He'll still end up a historical footnote to Dylan. He was a prolific songwriter with a lucrative catalog any corporation would happily monetize, but there are only a few names our descendants will ever learn. A very strange beginning. Okay, so Paul Simon sells his catalog to Sony for millions. Is this Jeff Slate fellow who's described as a singer-songwriter? Is he envious that no one is willing to pay millions for his catalog? He'll still end up a historical footnote to Dylan. How does the one follow the other? He begins, the best day of Paul Simon's life may have just been December the 7th. That was the day it was announced that Bob Dylan, Simon's longtime Columbia Records label mate, had sold his catalog of songs to the Universal Music Publishing Group, Columbia's rival. Always a ruthless operator, Simon no doubt saw the sale by Dylan to the rival company as a golden opportunity. Surely the brass at Sony, which owns Columbia, wouldn't want to also lose Simon's lucrative publishing catalog, which includes his classics with Art Garfunkel like Bridge Over Troubled Water and The Sound of Silence, as well as solo hits like Still Crazy After All These Years and You Can Call Me Al. More than 400 titles in all. Again, this fellow Slate seems to be upset for some reason, personally upset that Paul Simon has cashed in. Why do people go into the music business? Well, I suppose, for the same reason that Hank Williams and Kurt Cobain did, to become rich and famous. So it would appear that, Sony buying these songs, some of them, from the 1960s for a lot of money would indicate that there is still a lot of interest in Paul Simon's songs. Slate continues, and so Paul Simon has just become the latest top-tier songwriter to cash it all in, boo, and sell his catalog of songs in the past several months. Along with Dylan's sale, reported at $400 million, artists from Neil Young to Stevie Nicks to Rihanna to Ryan Tedder of One Republic have sold all the publishing rights, or in Young's case, half, allowing others to exploit their works in the future in just about any way the buyers see fit. Oh, dear. Of course, songwriters don't want their works exploited. For the average listener, that means you'll be hearing Paul Simon's songs in not just the usual places like films, Spotify, and YouTube, but also on TikTok and whatever comes next, plus most likely in commercials, hawking Cadillacs to Kit Kat bars. The Clash allowed one of their songs to be used in a Jaguar commercial. I think it was London Calling. Just a few days ago, I recognized the Pet Shop Boys song, Opportunities, being used in an insurance commercial, Allstate, if I remember correctly. Slate continues, the rights to a song are a little understood but incredibly lucrative side of the music business, hence the record sums that publishing giants like Sony and Universal and upstarts like Hipgnosis Songs Fund and Primary Wave are ponying up. What Simon and his contemporaries are selling are the copyrights for the songwriting, which are very different from the rights to the recordings he made with Garfunkel or as a solo artist. Simon is reported to have owned his songwriting catalog outright. A clever man. And Sony is reported to have purchased 100% of the rights to his song, so any future income that would have gone to Simon as the songwriter and copyright owner, if anyone were to record or use his song, will now go to Sony. If the sale all feels a little beneath a 60s counterculture icon, yes, once again, we're supposed to believe that people didn't go into the music business in the 1960s because they wanted to become rich and famous. especially one whose early songs soundtracked the boomer generation, including actually acting as the soundtrack to the 1967 Mike Nichols film The Graduate, starring Dustin Hoffman, and who remained relevant well into the MTV era with his Graceland album. Ask yourself the question, why shouldn't Paul Simon cash out? He's 79 and he's earned it. I don't think you believe that, Jeff. It may feel as though he's saying screw you to all the folk-loving fans who grew up with him, who are no doubt listening to his recordings on Spotify, which pays him pennies, of course, in their Audis. Boo. But Simon is never worried about what anyone thinks of him. Remember, this is the guy who, when the mood struck him, broke Art Garfunkel's heart countless times over the last 60 years. Oh, do you know this, Jeff Slate? Who was unrepentantly taken from up-and-coming artists who acted like an imperialist conqueror if it suited his artistic needs. Oh, yes, recording with South African musicians in South Africa was acting like an imperialist conqueror. And who, of course, was allegedly to have shoved his wife of then more than 20 years. Both were arrested on domestic violence charges after that fight in 2014. Prosecutors dropped the charges in both cases. How is this really, how is Paul Simon's marital woes really relevant to any discussion of his music and its lasting work? And let's face it, Simon hasn't had any kind of a hit in more than a decade. Oh, really? So this Jeff Slate fellow doesn't know how to use Wikipedia, which I'm going to read from. Stranger to Stranger is the 13th solo album by American folk rock singer Paul Simon, produced by Paul Simon and Roy Haley. It was released June 3rd, 2016 through Concord Records. His first release in over 5 years, Stranger to Stranger, received wide critical acclaim. It represented Simon's highest ever debut on the Billboard 200 at number 3 and reached number 1 on the UK albums chart. Okay, that was 5 years ago, less than 5 years ago. Number 3 on the Billboard 200 and number 1 on the UK albums chart. That certainly sounds like a hit to me. Let's see, Slate continues. The vast majority of the songs that Sony bought from Simon will become all but worthless in the not-so-distant future. Not everyone can write Homeward Bound or even 50 Ways to Lose Your Lover, so why not capitalize on Sony's hurt feelings over losing out on Dylan's masterworks? Is that why? Is that why Sony bought Paul Simon's song? Because of hurt feelings? There's another darker reality assuredly at work. Well, the Beatles and Dylan's places in history, not just musical history, but history, are no doubt etched in stone. Even their contemporaries like Young are beginning to fade from relevance. It's hard to imagine that in 200 years or more, when historians dig into the culture of the late 20th century, anybody but the Beatles and Bob Dylan will be worth more than a passing mention. That means Young and Joni Mitchell and Bruce Springsteen and, of course, Paul Simon, all giants in their day, will be no more than footnotes at best to Dylan and the Beatles, if only because history is a blunt instrument and doesn't have room, at least not in the broadest sense, for subtlety. So Paul Simon, who is essentially an also-ran 60s icon on a centurial or millennial scale, is making a rational calculation. He's cashing out while he can in the hope that the broader commercialization of his greatest works might just secure him a better place in history, if even temporarily, no matter how sad an indictment of our times that might be. Paul Simon selling his publishing catalog to Sony is a sad indictment of our times. Is it? Wow, that guy certainly woke up on the wrong side of the bed. From the Wrap, Paul Simon's fans cry foul when NBC op-ed calls him a footnote to Bob Dylan. And yes, it was all rather predictable. Stephen Van Zandt wrote on Twitter, more than harsh, the writer's view of history is simply profoundly inaccurate. The 60s was a Renaissance period that will be studied for hundreds of years to come. Dylan, Lennon-McCartney, Jagger Richards, and yes, Paul Simon et al. Were Beethoven's, Mozart's, and Tchaikovsky's. Well, a bit hyperbolic, one might say. Paul Simon is an international treasure who has brought us all delight for decades. Not the same thing can be said about NBC News. Monty Python comedian Eric Idle at it. and a whole bunch of others spoke out. So I was asked about this, what I thought of the article, and I thought, well, the argument is preposterous. If you go to Rick Beato's site, which I quite like, he has a 11-minute little essay about this and points out that we don't know what is going to be remembered 200 years from now. And he uses the example of Johann Sebastian Bach. In 1821, Bach was pretty much forgotten. His music was considered over-elaborate, old-fashioned, over-formal, but there was revival. And I guess since the mid-19th centuries, he has been at the top where he remains. So no, we don't know who is going to be famous in the future. But this fellow, Jeff Slate, he realized something. I have to give him credit for cleverness. You know, there are two ways to make a name for yourself. One is to pull yourself up, and the other is to push someone else down. And this is what Slate has done, and suddenly everyone is talking about a fellow that few people had heard of before this NBC News essay was published. Tom Wolfe did the same thing. One of the ways that he made his reputation was writing an essay attacking the New Yorker magazine, which became an absolute sensation. This appeared in the New York Magazine. I'm reading for a piece from The Observer. For the first time since 1965, when it originally appeared in New York Magazine, then still the Sunday supplement of the New York Herald Tribune, a newspaper that no longer exists, Tom Wolfe's two-part Tiny Mummies attack on the New York Magazine will be published in a new collection of his work titled Hooking Up, due from Farrar, Straus, and Giroux in October. 2 years ago, Wolfe told The Observer why he had never put the piece, original title, Tiny Mummies, the true story of the ruler of 43rd Street's Land of the Walking Dead, and Lost in the Witchy Thicket, in a book. I knew that if I did, the book would be reviewed solely for that. That would be the only thing anybody would notice. He also said, what I always wanted to do, and would do now if I thought the world had any interest, to do just a book on the piece and reprint the whole controversy. Salinger's telegram, E.B. White's telegram, Dwight McDonald's 2 pieces about it. It was a wild story, and no one could figure out why Sean would get that excited about this piece, which doesn't condemn him or denigrate him, except to say that he's mousy and tidy and runs a dull magazine. Muriel Spark also publicly shrieked in horror at this attack on The New Yorker, which had published her novel, The Crime of Miss Jean Brodie, in its entirety in The New Yorker. I think that's an important part of what Tom did as a journalist, said Galassi. And, you know, everybody else is weighing in about The New Yorker. This is the piece that started the whole thing, so it makes sense for it to be published. Don't you think? Unlike other New Yorker Anna, Wolfe does not begin with the premise that the magazine had a heyday that it lost. He says it stunk to start with. Here's a bit of Tiny Mummies taken from the photocopied scraps of the article that have been circulating in this office for years. The New Yorker was never anything more than a rather slavish copy of Punch. Nevertheless, literati in America took to it like they were dying of thirst. The need was so great that the New Yorker was first praised and then practically canonized. Let's have a look at the chat. Hello to Yo Mama, Gamion, Palcaso 88, Chogokin 66, Chogokin 666. Some very interesting, this is from Anne Run, some very interesting vaccine skeptic comments from Neurodoc in today's Kunstler article comments section. I think Dawn from Beyond will find them particularly scary. Steve says, hello, wokeness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. As far as Paul Simon goes, I'd say if anyone asked me for an example of a perfect pop album, it would be Bookends, an album that Paul Simon wrote and Columbia Records released in 1968. It's thoughtful, moving, great musicianship, and the tunes are ace. Don from Beyond says, though I live in Florida, my county bureaucrats have decided to keep the mandatory masks for students. My 6-year-old grandson subjected to ritual abuse every school day. Masking children is child abuse. Mixed feelings on the PSBs, but that is truly a great lyric. I rather like the album Mrs. Paul Simon did with Steve Martin, says Max Vitriol. Simon saw a Deadhead sticker on a Cadillac, says Pitsky. No, that was Don Henley, I believe. Enron says, I read one of the articles this weasel linked to and did laugh at Garfunkel telling Simon that no matter what happens, he'll always be taller. Does Art Garfunkel still have his hair? Paul Simon wore a rather ridiculous wig for decades. I think he's stopped. Hello to William Hicks. British American says, check out the renditions of Simon and Garfunkel in the SCTV parody of 2001. Oh, that was from the final season of SCTV, which was on Cinemax, and it's not available on a DVD, sadly. But that parody of 2001 was just absolutely hilarious. Okay, let's talk about COVID-19, the disease that will not go away. You know, it seems that the media has moved into a position now where they're openly pushing zero COVID, which is, well, it's just totally nuts. Oh, we haven't smashed society enough? We haven't wrecked the economy enough? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet, apparently. It's an article from Molly Hemingway in The Federalist. Rather than cover actual scandals involving Democrat governors and their botched responses to COVID, CBS's 60 Minutes tried to invent a scandal involving Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' distribution of vaccines. To push the false narrative and protect its favorite governors, 60 Minutes refused to interview people who disputed its false narrative, selectively edited video to hide facts, and omitted data that debunked its thesis and accurately described Florida's successes. It's not that 60 Minutes couldn't have reported on real scandals involving governors and COVID if it wanted to. New York's Democrat Governor Andrew Cuomo, a media darling despite his many failures, sent COVID patients into long-term care facilities full of vulnerable people and then covered it up. California's Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom has imposed draconian lockdown measures that have crushed his state's economy, its schools, and the entire population of the state. He is currently facing a recall attempt from citizens livid at his handling. To protect these men, the Democrat-allied news show instead targeted Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, widely recognized for his leadership during the pandemic. Unlike most political leaders, DeSantis has balanced the health concerns from the pandemic with the public and societal health concerns of harsh lockdowns that destroy economies, children's lives, the ability of people to provide for their families, and the right of people to worship and live their lives. The result is a state that hasn't just tackled COVID, but has done so without destroying families or the economy that sustains them. The success has happened even though Florida has the second oldest population in the country, and COVID is known for hitting seniors far harder than other age groups. Yes, actually, if you go to the COVID dashboard for the province of Alberta, it controversially lists the average age of death from COVID, which apparently we're told is not relevant. Well, in Alberta, it is 81, which tells you a lot about that disease and how it works. Molly Hemingway continues, 60 Minutes, known best for pushing obviously forged documents weeks prior to the 2004 election in order to harm Republican President George W. Bush, took the approach of claiming that Florida's vaccine distribution has been uniquely chaotic and the result of some ill-defined pay-to-play conspiracy theory developed by its reporter Sharon Alfonsi. Alfonsi focused her reporting for the last month in beautiful Palm Beach, where she half-cooked a conspiracy theory about his vaccination distribution. One part of it, that DeSantis was only prioritizing vaccination for seniors, not because they are the group far and away the most vulnerable to getting seriously sick, hospitalized, or dying from COVID, but because Florida seniors are more likely to be wealthy and white, boo, than the rest of the population, or because they're more likely to vote for him. Another part of the conspiracy theory is that despite all evidence to the contrary, DeSantis had personally rammed through a decision to use Publix grocery stores for vaccine distribution. Publix was used to help out with vaccine distribution, 60 Minutes insinuated, not because they are far and away the most ubiquitous grocery chain in Florida, but because they had given DeSantis a routine political contribution last year, totaling less than 3% of what he got in political contributions for February alone. Alfonsi claimed she obtained these records of political contributions, a dramatic word choice for publicly available contribution records. No one claims that Publix did a bad job with the vaccine distribution or that they inappropriately pocketed the money from the program, which has been widely viewed as successful. Alfonsi's position seems to be that since the Publix made a typical contribution to DeSantis, he should have banned the grocery chain's hundreds of pharmacy locations from helping distribute the vaccine to Florida's vulnerable and aging population. 60 Minutes edited this interview with DeSantis in order to make it seem that he was refusing to answer a question, and he answered the question in full. My advice to politicians and everyone else is that if you are approached for the media for an interview, to tell them I would sooner slit my tongue with a razor blade than talk to you weasels. Here's a story from the Mail. Police turned up at a Polish Catholic church again today during an Easter Sunday Mass after officers shut down its Good Friday service for breaching COVID rules and threatened worshippers with £200 fines. Officers shut down the religious ceremony in Balham High Street, South London, at around 5 p.m. Friday, with footage showing one telling worshippers that the gathering was unlawful and that they had to go home. Today, dozens of Christians attended Easter Mass services at Christ the King Polish Roman Catholic Church, with many forced to kneel outside to avoid overcrowding. About 50 smartly dressed worshippers had to listen to Mass through speakers introduced after Friday's clash. Many families with small children gathered outside before being allowed to go into the church later when there was more room inside. Though 2 police officers arrived and spoke to church stewards, they left soon after, not repeating Friday's extraordinary scenes when cops stood at the altar and demanded worshippers go home. In a statement on Friday's intervention, a police spokesperson said, officers attended and found a large number of people inside the church. Some people were not wearing masks, and those present were clearly not socially distanced. Understanding the sensitivity of the situation, officers engaged with the priests outside the church and were invited inside to address the congregation. No fixed penalty notices were issued. Yes, it's a boon time for atheists, isn't it? And the police in Britain and elsewhere seem to be determined to make themselves hated, rather self-destructive, I would think. Here's another story from the Daily Mail. Will pub jab passports sneak in by the back door? Social distancing rules in bars could be scrapped early if bosses demand COVID certification from drinkers. As I pointed out before, these vaccine passports are absolutely useless because they say that such and such a person was free of COVID-19 or, was not infectious at a point in time. Not that they're, safe today, but at the time the test was taken, they were. MPs are to get a vote on the passport issue. It was reported last night. Oh, wow, MPs get to vote on this. I suppose MPs they've been pretty much shut out of the whole COVID-19 hysteria. No, the government has simply, in the Chris Whitty and the Prime Minister have simply seized power. Michael Gove was said to have made the promise to those uneasy with the plans, with one source telling the Daily Telegraph. Michael made a very clear statement with MPs that there would be debates and votes before anything like this came into force. Those against the proposal include at least 40 Tories, which would be enough to wipe out the government's majority. However, Boris Johnson will give the green light today for further work on schemes that require people to show they're at low risk of harboring the virus. And let's go to lockdown skeptics. Imperial, it will be vital to emphasize the importance of normalizing and ensuring adherence to all measures, even after full lifting is achieved. Yes, apparently, the MPs in Britain, who were elected representatives of the people, have been displaced by boffins from Imperial College. UK health regulator may restrict AstraZeneca COVID vaccine for younger people. Meanwhile, in Texas, this is a good news story. Well, Go Slow Bojo talks about keeping masks and social distancing in place for another year at least, and bringing in vaccine passports for large events as a start. This was the scene in Texas today, tweeted by Sam Gannon, a sports reporter for KDFW Fox 4. A packed stadium for a baseball game, no vaccine passport required, not a mask in sight. Texas ended all restrictions and mask requirements at the beginning of March, and since then has seen positive cases drop to their lowest level since last summer. Doubtless COVID is still around, and they will see it return at some point to a greater or lesser extent. But Texans no longer live in fear of it or allow their lives to be governed by often fruitless efforts to avoid it. Texas, like a number of other states, has decided that the risk as a society is manageable, and as individuals, they have decided it is a risk worth taking to be free and live their lives. The land of the free and the home of the brave indeed. How long will countries like the UK be able to keep up the draconian emergency measures when their people see Americans back to living normal lives and no medical catastrophe unfolding? When will we have the report from SAGE on the experiences of states in America like Texas, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and Mississippi that have lifted restrictions? When will the government's modelers show us how well their models predict the outcomes in those states? How long until our government ministers and MPs start questioning the self-serving advice they're getting from scientific advisors up to their necks in lockdownism and start standing up for freedom? And we find out that the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, he's unsure about whether he wants to end the COVID hysteria. Boris Johnson's Easter Monday press conference was a depressing affair, with the Prime Minister confirming that vaccine passports will be required to access large-scale events like football games, warning that social distancing measures will need to remain in place after June 21st, and a traffic light system will be unveiled on May the 17th to determine which foreign countries were allowed to go to. Johnson said he would not provide a hostage to fortune by giving any timeline. According to SAGE, who have, as previously noted, seized control of Britain, social distancing and masks must remain for another year to avoid deaths reaching January levels this summer, despite vaccines. Well, all our politicians told us, all of them, that we get the vaccine and then we can go back to normal. And now they're saying, no, it doesn't make any difference. You're going to need masks for a year, maybe longer, maybe forever. And let's go to Alex Berenson's Twitter account. There's a continuing campaign to cancel him. Yes, he has also noted what happened in Texas where the Blue Jays were playing the Rangers. Looks like Texas is done with the row. And he goes into detail about, let's say, what Derek Thompson's ludicrous attack on him on Atlantic Magazine. Again, if you find yourself attacked by Atlantic Magazine, you know that you are doing the right thing. Many schools have had to cancel days because COVID vaccinations have sickened so many teachers at once. This is the first time I've seen a major company admit the same problem. Delta cancels flights due to staff shortages, opens up middle seats. Meanwhile, teachers in California are demanding free childcare before they go back to work. How about that? You know, once again, teachers seem to be just on the cusp of reaching their long-held goal of getting 12 months off a year instead of 3 and still being paid. And I'm going to go back to the chat. Okay. Palcasso88 says Ottawa's chief medical officer in the news tonight whining that Doug Ford hasn't gone far enough with lockdown. Villain for Fun says literally everyone in Florida shops at Publix. Jokerkin666, the absolute arrogance of the Met. Palcasso88, Lena Dunham has started a line of plus-size clothing. In olden times, late comics would be mocking her savagely. Yes, I was sent this piece from the New York Times by a friend. And, you know, the New York Times wrote about Lena Dunham when she was a teenager. She'd been to some party. The New York Times is determined to be Lena Dunham's publicist. Lena Dunham and the Spanx Liberation Movement. The actor, writer, director, controversy creator is back with a new project, a plus-size clothing line. The whole body positivity thing, she has thoughts. This is a story by Vanessa Friedman. How is this news? Exactly. How is this news? Lena Dunham, she had this TV show called Girls, which was her. It was quite simply her life, her whininess, her obnoxiousness, her lack of morals. Lena Dunham made a film called Tiny Furniture, which is about her parents, which somehow ended up in the Criterion collection. Lena Dunham is not a good actress. She's not good looking. She can't sing or play a musical instrument. And yet she is somehow famous and wealthy. In the 10 or so years since she first became famous, Lena Dunham has been many things. She has been a wunderkind, a writer, director, actor, producer of both feature films and television series, voice of her generation, David Remnick mentee, a Golden Globe winner, and representative of liberal white privilege. She has been a Vogue cover girl, newsletter maven, and subject of social media shaming. Oh dear. Also head of her own book imprint at Random House. Remember when Random House was a serious publisher? Endometriosis and hysterectomy survivor, and overshare her. I am not, she said recently, a celebrity who's ever been asked to represent a product. I am not a person for many reasons who anyone even wants to represent a product. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. There's that blonde plus-size comedian who's now selling tampons on a TV. And in the process of wearing a lot of clothes, like most people, and getting a lot of clothes slightly wrong, like most people, and being attacked for the clothes she wore, she discovered a hole in the market. So being Lena Dunham, she decided she was the one to fix it. Of course, Lena Dunham is notorious for many things, one of which is taking her clothes off in front of cameras. And no one wants to see this woman naked. This week, 11 Honoré X Lena Dunham debuts, a collaboration between Dunham and the e-tail site that has championed high fashion for plus-size women, getting runway designers to make their brands accessible beyond size 10. It will be 11 Honoré's first celebrity foray, and it is a tightly edited collection of only 5 items. Because, Dunham said, I've totally given up on the idea of being any type of impresario or a person who had something to say to everyone. So, your clothing line has 5 items in it? How lazy are you? Right now, the only thing I'm doing is speaking about my own experience, because that's what you want in a couturier. Someone who's going to express her own experience. So this clothing line is a direct response to my experience. Introducing Lena version 8.0 or 15.0, humble but enthusiastic body neutral advocate and new celebrity designer, at peace with herself and about to emerge into the world once more. At peace with herself? Yes, I rather doubt it. Yeah, and let's go back to the chat here. Snow days, COVID days, says Bob Paxson. The perennial spelling error turned out prophetic. Anti-fascists. Don Willis quotes Charles Manson. A long time ago, being crazy meant something. Nowadays, everybody's crazy. Gamion said she'd randomly get naked in the show. Gross and masochistic. Was this for the Emmys or something like that? That she was seen naked sitting on a toilet eating? Yikes. Richard Avedon could not make Lena look good, says Bob Paxson. Did Noah Baumbach sign a contract with Criterion? All his movies get Criterion DVDs. The same for Wes Anderson, asks and Run. Popcasso88 says, watching girls made me envy Helen Keller. Well, you see, she was clearly trolling us because the other three girls on that show, each one of them was much better looking than Lena Dunham, but we never got to see them naked. Okay. What are we going to talk about next? Oh, yeah. Baseball. I was tempted over the weekend. I made a promise on Friday that I had dropped baseball. And I was tempted over the weekend to watch the Blue Jays. It looks like they might have a good team this year, but I stayed strong, resisted the temptation. Jim Kunstler writes about peak woke. What were the execs of these mighty companies thinking, these knights of the boardroom, these capitalist geniuses, these moral nonpareils, when they canceled Atlanta's turn to host the Midsummer All-Star Game to protest Georgia's passage of a law that requires voter ID? Surely that they were striking a righteous blow against systemic racism. And then the rest of the world realized almost immediately that Major League Baseball requires online ticket buyers to show ID when they pick up their tickets at any stadium, and that Delta Airlines requires passengers to show ID before being allowed to fly in one of their airplanes, and that various other corporations snookered into this latest hustle, such as Nike, Coca-Cola, and Calvin Klein, support forced labor in the Asian nations that manufacture their products. I see that PayPal has also spoken out against Georgia's electoral integrity law, which reminded me, what was it, a couple of years ago or so? PayPal required for me not only my government ID, but also both sides of my birth certificate, my latest tax return, and my bank records. Kunstler continues, they're woke, you see. The tentacles of wokery have reached into every last compartment of American life now, more effectively even than the COVID-19 coronavirus. Wokeness emerged on the scene in 2014 when the feckless teenager Michael Brown was shot to death by police officer Darren Wilson upon arrest in Ferguson, Missouri, an event that kicked off the Black Lives Matter movement. The moral panic BLM ignited proved to be a spectacularly effective device for repelling the truth of the situation and many more like it, which was that Michael Brown resisted arrest, fought with, and menaced Officer Wilson before getting shot. The woke moral panic that proceeded from this effectively suppressed two truths about police relations with Black America. One, that Blacks committed crimes against life and property at a disproportionately high rate to their percentage in the U.S. population. And two, that the number of unarmed people killed by police was statistically minuscule and in most cases involved people resisting arrest or fighting with police. As the 2016 election approached, the Democratic Party realized that it was in its interest to cultivate the woke moral panic so as to marshal the Black voting bloc, so crucial to victory at the polls. With help of their allies in the news media and the coddled faculty ideologues on campus, the Democrats fed this moral panic until it grew into a historic mass hysteria, every bit as insane as the witchcraft hysterias of the Middle Ages in Europe. Then Trump came along, inflicting a savage trauma on the left, and after his election, the news media and the campus crusaders were joined by very potently placed officers in the federal bureaucracy, especially the intel community with its weapons for disordering public opinion, and the Department of Justice with its ability to ruin lives and reputations, to crush Trump and everyone who opposed the left's will to power. They kept it up for 4 years, using every device in the bureaucracy to drive Trump from office while deliberately gaslighting, hoaxing, misdirecting, and bamboozling the public. In the process, the Democratic Party became hostage to the worst elements among its supporters and foot soldiers: the race hustlers, the gender deranged, the criminal sociopaths, the limousine Marxists, the Wall Street swindlers, the Silicon Valley megalomaniacs, and even America's foreign adversaries, as evidenced by the Biden family's lucrative dealings with the party that runs China. In 2020, China gave the Democrats their greatest gift, COVID-19, a means to wreck the U.S. economy and an excuse to pare away Americans' constitutional rights to various freedoms of speech, published expression, movement, association, self-defense, and economic liberty. Finally, in managing to elect the inert and incompetent Joe Biden, the party went a scam too far. All social hysterias run their courses. They run out of new gags and out of new recruits. Their tropes grow tiresome, even comical, such as the woke mainstays of racism, misogyny, and white supremacy. Their promptings reveal themselves as obviously dishonest. The punishments they seek seem increasingly warped and sadistic. The behavior they induce begins to look patently insane. That's where America stands now. Kunstler continues, to keep the flywheel of hysteria spinning during the COVID year of 2020, the Dems turned the death of George Floyd into a new and improved second coming of Michael Brown in order to juice BLM for the fall election. This time, there were video cameras galore on the scene to capture what turned out to be an ambiguously deceptive storyline. Half the world flipped out at the sight of Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck at that Minneapolis intersection. It sure didn't look good. Now that former officer Chauvin is on trial for murder 2 and 3 plus manslaughter, the prosecution spent a week demonstrating indeed how bad it looked, with one witness after another who described how bad it made them feel to watch George Floyd die. Of course, watching anything die can be horrifying. It was, in essence, a wholly sentimental case for the prosecution. The defense is ready to present facts that tell a different story of a multiple violent felon and drug abuser hopped up on dangerous levels of narcotics and stimulants with an impressively dire array of medical problems, including COVID-19, who refused to follow police instructions and in a manner that appeared deranged, leading to his being subdued by an approved police procedure to prevent harm to himself and others. The Minneapolis City Council already queered the trial before it started by granting a $27 million settlement to the Floyd family, officially imputing guilt on Chauvin's side. BLM has made it clear that they will not accept an acquittal. Even a conviction is liable to inspire riots as the victory dance revs into the warm spring nighttime. Judging by last year's BLM uprisings in city after city, the precedent has been established that mob violence is justified and holds no consequences. Something tells me that this particular error in political thinking will not be indulged this time around. The woke hysteria and the hustles that grow out of it have shot their wad. Something else has awakened in this land, Kunstler concludes, a recognition that we are in serious trouble, that our adversaries are having their way with us as we act stupidly, that we have become our own worst enemies, that being insane is not a virtue. You know, it's long been my belief that insanity is, in fact, communicable, a disease. So insanity breeds insanity. I see that the Greg Sargent, a columnist at the Washington Post, is very upset at what has happened in Georgia and the reaction to it. He writes, an extraordinary event took place in Georgia on Wednesday night. Republicans sought to cancel a tax break for Delta Airlines, the state's biggest employer, as punishment for the heresy of criticizing the new voter suppression law Republicans passed last week. And a top Republican has openly, blithely confirmed that this was exactly the motive. This latest turn in the Georgia voting wars is wretched in its own right, but it also helps clarify some larger national themes. The profound phoniness of many GOP screams about cancel culture and woke corporations, and the ugly nature of GOP culture warmongering, which has grown all-consuming. Oh, yeah, it hurts when people fight back, doesn't it, Greg Sargent? And there has been more pushback. This is from Wendell Husibo at Breitbart. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has declined to throw the first pitch at the Texas Rangers home opener and declined to participate in any Major League Baseball events after the league announced plans to relocate their All-Star game from Atlanta in response to Georgia's newly passed election integrity law. Major League Baseball adopted what has turned out to be a false narrative about the election law reforms in Georgia, and based on that false narrative, moved the Major League Baseball All-Star Game from Atlanta, Abbott said. It is shameful that America's pastime is not only being influenced by partisan political politics, but also perpetuating false political narratives. This decision does not diminish the deep respect I have for the Texas Rangers baseball organization, which is outstanding from top to bottom. The MLB relocating from Atlanta is projected to cost the city as much as $190 million in revenue, hurting Atlanta's majority Black population that is just overcoming the Chinese pandemic. Coca-Cola. Again, John Nolte from Breitbart. The Georgia Republican Party is booting Coca-Cola from state legislative offices after the soda giant deliberately misled the public about Georgia's new voter integrity law. In a letter sent directly to Coke's woke Gestapo, the Georgia State House of Representatives said in part, given Coke's choice to cave into the pressure of an out-of-control cancel culture, we respectfully request all Coca-Cola Company products be removed from our office suite immediately. Should Coke choose to read the bill, share its true intentions, and accept their role in the dissemination of mistruths, we would welcome a conversation to rebuild a working relationship. We have the responsibility to all of Georgia to not engage in those misguided intentions, nor continue to support corporations who choose to. Given Coke's choice to cave to the pressure of an out-of-control cancel culture, we respectfully request all Coca-Cola Company products be removed from our office suite immediately. Yes, so you have baseball, which has long been known as America's pastime, has been paused, and Coca-Cola, which was long known as America's drink, has now been paused as well. And, Mike Huckabee. This story is too funny. This is from Emily Jacobs of the New York Post. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is under fire for a tweet he posted over the weekend saying he will identify as Chinese in order to earn the approval of major U.S. corporations. Coke will like me, Delta will agree with my values, and I'll probably get shoes from Nike and tickets to MLB games. Ain't America great? Huckabee tweeted. The tweet was met with immediate backlash on the social media platform Twitter, with many noting the steep uptick in anti-Asian hate crimes in the last year. Elderly Asian women are getting beaten up on the street, and you say this, wrote actress Patricia Arquette. Is she still an actress? Every time I hear about her, it's about her saying something stupid on Twitter. One lawmaker responded by asking the former governor's daughter, former White House press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, whether she condoned her father's rhetoric. It's clear that Mike Huckabee was not mocking Asian people. Neither was he calling for violence against them. He was mocking the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, they know this, don't they? Don't they? This is from the Daily Mail. A Republican congresswoman has called out Major League Baseball for moving an all-star game out of Georgia over its controversial new voter ID law, while still requiring fans to show photo ID to pick up tickets. South Carolina Republican Representative Nancy Mace suggested that the league's ticket policy was hypocritical, given its opposition to the law, which will require voters to provide a state ID number on their absentee ballot. Hey, MLB, this you? Mace wrote, along with a screenshot of the will call policy at MLB.com. The official policy states group and hospitality tickets left at will call will be held under one person's name, and that person will need a picture ID to pick up their tickets. I remember when I was living in San Diego, one of the other fellows who worked at the station, who was a friend of mine, he was a friend with a sports reporter who had access to where the journalists go for the game. You know, you can watch the game. They give you free beer and food. And it was the last game of the season. It was a meaningless game. He didn't want to go. So he gave my friend 2 tickets. And I got one of them, and they demanded ID for the ticket, which turned out to be something of a problem because the ticket was not in my name. But let's all pretend we don't know how ID works in the United States of America. It's a piece on the trial in Minneapolis from Richard Greenhorn at the American Sun. From the very beginning, the case against Derek Chauvin has been driven by the mob. It was a small mob gathered outside of Cup Foods on Memorial Day last year who turned a group of police officers trying to subdue a giant ODing felon into an international incident. It was a larger mob that torched Minneapolis and made the current prosecution inevitable. It is a mob outside the Hennepin County Courthouse, which keeps the embarrassing sham of a trial moving forward. The legal question in the Chauvin case is so simple as to be boring. Did Officer Chauvin use excessive force on George Floyd while subduing him? There is an honest manslaughter charge that could be prosecuted out of this question. Only the mob could turn it into the murder charges Chauvin now faces. The mob is central to the current case, and Attorney General Keith Ellison knows this. If the jurors unite themselves to the mob, the state will get its conviction. The state tipped its hand as early as its opening statement last Monday. For a trial that will last many weeks, the opening statements of both the state and the defense were astoundingly short. The state focused heavily on the 9-minute cell phone video of the incident, the video all the jurors and everyone who cares about the case has seen innumerable times. The video is incendiary, and it is easy to see how a group of rabble could be roiled up by it. It fits the BLM narrative that racist cops have so much power that they can murder with impunity on the streets of Minneapolis. But as evidence, it is equivocal. If Chauvin knew that he was being videotaped, as he undoubtedly did, how stupid did he have to be to commit such a blatant murder on a crowded city street? The video is evidence that Chauvin was acting in a way he thought was proper. It shows the legal question is one of degrees, not cold-blooded murder. During its opening arguments, the state displayed to the jury the picture of an ugly, unemotive Floyd, that one now omnipresent in Minneapolis and every urban area. Why that picture? The state has the ability to enter what is called spark of life evidence, which allows the state to enter pictures and testimony of what Floyd was actually like in life. Why not a picture of him at a ball game or fishing or mowing the lawn? The state doesn't want that living, breathing creature in the courtroom, but the ugly mug under which cities have burned. After calling the initial 911 responder, the state went to work calling members of the first small mob to the witness stand one by one. This did not go smoothly. The second witness was a blue-haired woman who worked at the Safeway across from Cup Foods and captured some of the incident on video. She was clearly not prepared, looking sleepy, almost inebriated. Such a witness is amusing for cable TV viewers, but it is exasperating for anyone actually involved with the trial. The state has an army of attorneys working on its behalf, but they apparently can't spare any time for witness preparation. The next witness, Donald Williams, was an MMA fighter and heckled Chauvin and the other officers during the incident. In an embarrassing display, the state tried again and again to get in Williams' testimony as quasi-medical evidence, attempts the jury rightly smacked down. He claimed not to have been angry even after threatening to beat up the officers. Williams came off as a charismatic jerk, the kind of guy who can tell a police officer he's going to shoot himself and claim he doesn't mean that officer any harm. He wore what appeared to be a Black Lives Matter shirt underneath his dress shirt. He clearly saw himself as an expert over what he saw last Memorial Day and was almost offended when the judge and defense attorney, as a matter of law, disagreed with him. The state then called some young women who were members of that original mob outside of Cup Foods. Though now 18, the state brought in a light lady prosecutor to talk to them like little girls. How did it make you feel? And what impact has it had on you? This is textbook irrelevant evidence. But strictly speaking, many of these witnesses are not even necessary given the incident is all on video. The purposes of calling these witnesses is to keep alive the initial anger and confusion of the mob, not establish facts. Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, gave an underwhelming opening statement. It was bizarrely short. It could have gone on for hours and not been too long. The state is hoping the jurors act like a mob. Nelson's job is to make sure they don't, in fact, to make them indignant that the state should treat them as such. That is not that tall of an order. The state's irrational argument relies on the mob mentality, and that relies on the cult of George Floyd. Insert just some of the basic facts about the man, such that he was high on fentanyl at the time, and the cult is broken, and a rational person begins to wonder, what else have they been lying to me about? The last witness calls Tuesday was a chubby female EMT, another bystander outside Cup Foods, harassing and second-guessing the police. Nelson has been nothing but courteous to the witnesses, but the EMT couldn't help but snipe at him and the judge. Williams, the MMA fighter, did the same. Both the EMT and Williams want their initial snap judgments and limited expertise to control the case. They and the rest of that little mob condemned Chauvin months ago. One can forgive them for being so disrespectful towards court procedure and substantive law. The state is doing the same thing. Apparently, there are people upset that this poor woman, people were being mean to her. Here's a story from the Daily Wire by Amanda Prestigiacomo. Model and Black Lives Matter activist Maya Eccles warned that Minneapolis would suffer riots and vandalism if former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is not convicted for the death of George Floyd. If George Floyd's murderer is not sentenced, just know that all hell is going to break loose, Eccles said in a now removed video. Don't be surprised when buildings are on fire, just saying. The social media influencer, a signed IMG worldwide model, has nearly 500,000 followers on TikTok. Yes, Ashley Gant, a prominent Black Lives Matter leader in Rochester, New York, made waves last summer when she said she did not care if the whole city burned down. Well, not going as far as esteemed model and activist Maya Eccles. Oh, yes, the chubby EMT. Samson Amore, or Amore. Derek Chauvin trial, critics call sexism on questioning of firefighter Genevieve Hansen. This is going to be problematic for the Chauvin defense, MSNBC's Joy Ann Reid says. Joy Ann Reid. Oh, well, case closed. Sexism, eh? If this EMT had been male, I'm pretty sure the judge would have cited him for contempt of court and, advised him to bring a toothbrush with him, as they say. Oh, another BLM hero. Oh, we've learned some things about this fellow. The famous jogger. This is from Steve Saylor's blog. The shooting of Ahmaud Arbery, the saintly jogger, by a white man in the South while trying to take the man's gun was used by the national press as George Floyd 0.9 in early May 2020 to whip up racial hatred, which exploded catastrophically later in the month in the racial reckoning. Not surprising, it turns out that Arbery was not the ascetic long-distance runner of instant media legend, from a document filed by the defense legal team. The following evidence shows Arbery's modus operandi: his motive, his preparation, his plan, his identity, his intent, and thus his absence of mistake to use running or jogging as a cover to commit crimes against persons and the community, to steal, to commit burglary, to commit forcible felonies, and to either flee when challenged, confronted, or questioned by citizens or law enforcement about his conduct, or to commit forcible felonies against citizens or law enforcement who challenge, confront, or question his conduct. Now, let's see. March 2013, security camera video from South Georgia Technical College reveals Arbery provided a friend a pair of wire cutters to use as a weapon when he, the friend, and others waited for another group of men to appear. When the other group arrived, Arbery and the others engaged in a violent fight. December 2013, Glynn County Police reveal Arbery unlawfully concealed a handgun into his waistband and tried to gain admission into a high school basketball game. Who does something like that? Why would you take a handgun to a high school basketball game? Officers noticed the butt of the gun protruding from his waistband and ordered him to stop. Arbery ran from police, which resulted in 2 officers sustaining injuries. The chief of police reported that as he chased Arbery in his vehicle, Arbery reached into his waistband as if searching for the firearm. Police eventually surrounded Arbery and charged him, and he was later convicted for several felony and misdemeanor charges, including gun possession and obstruction. June 2018. 911 audio reveals Arbery's mother, Wanda Jones, called 911 due to Arbery's refusal to give Jones her car keys. She made the call from inside her car while Arbery stood outside her car. During her call to 911, she cautioned the operator that Arbery had a mental condition that had escalated over time. Additionally, Jones told the officer that Arbery might get violent with the officers due to his mental illness. August 2018. A body cam video reveals Arbery was caught by a stay-at-home mom who saw him in her backyard looking into the windows of her cars. She called police, who found Arbery at his grandmother's residence. Police officers arrived to give Arbery a trespass warning about his conduct and behavior. When confronted by the officers about the eyewitness report, he lied, said he had gone running in the street, and then became aggressive, confrontational, and repeatedly threatened that he would whip the officers' ass if they didn't leave him alone. He was not arrested. October 2018. Burke County reports a cam video reveal Arbery and two juveniles were confronted in a vacant mobile home by the Burke County Sheriff's Office. Arbery ran when confronted by the authorities. He was later caught and lied, stating he was just out running when asked about being in the mobile home. He was charged with a misdemeanor obstruction. December 2018. Glynn County officer body cam video reveals Arbery was arrested, charged, and later convicted for felony shoplifting by entering a store and attempting to steal a television. In 2019 and 2020, witness interviews reveal Arbery was seen by his own neighbors removing screen from windows and trying to enter their homes through the windows. When confronted by the neighbors about his behavior, he appeared nervous or agitated and trying to figure out where to go. Then he said he was interested in buying the house, but took off running. On the second occasion, the homeowner observed Arbery trying to gain entrance through a door. In 2019 and 2020, local convenience store witness interviews reveal Arbery became known as the jogger for his repeated conduct and behavior of running up, stretching in front in, and then entering several convenience stores where he would grab items and run out before he was caught. And it goes on and on and on. It's just a bad choice of heroes. Isn't there someone better that they could lionize? This is from the Manchester Evening News. Greater Manchester Police identify 809 members of child sex grooming gangs as new unit is launched. The Greater Manchester Police is running 3 major investigations into historic abuse of young girls in Manchester and Rockdale. A year in the planning, it comes in the wake of stinging criticism of the force from previous failings when investigating such crimes. Yes, many thousands of girls, adolescent girls in Britain were raped and turned out, forced to work as prostitutes, and this was covered up for about 20 years by the police, by local authorities, by national authorities. And why? Because they didn't want to be accused of racism. Here's a story from the Daily Mail. The convicted ringleader of a Rockdale grooming gang is walking freely around the very town where he abused young girls 6 years after he was told he would be deported. Kari Abdul Rauf, 51, was jailed for 6 years for trafficking and sex with a girl who was just 15. He was freed on license in 2014, but was told he faced deportation to Pakistan because he holds a dual nationality passport. But it appears he has somehow been able to frustrate the authorities' efforts to get him removed. I suppose deportation would be a form of racism as well. Here's another story from Simon Walters at the Daily Mail. A Cambridge academic who compared the black author of a race report to a Nazi has now criticized the royals for not talking about the crown's ties to slavery. Professor Priyamvata Gopal added that the royal family was a white institution which had profited from the British Empire. Dr. Gopal, professor of post-colonial studies at Churchill College, caused uproar last week when she compared Dr. Tony Sewell, who oversaw the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, to Adolf Hitler's propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels. Her latest provocative intervention came when she was asked about having called the monarchy a white supremacist organization in the past. "It was an institution invested in whiteness and where whites dominate," replied Dr. Gopal. "The monarchy is deeply implicated in the project of empire. A lot of what it possesses came right out of the imperial project. This is not a monarchy that has ever talked about its ties to empire or to slavery, for that matter. I am not going to apologize," she said. She was also questioned about having liked a tweet which claimed Prince Philip was the royal who the Duchess of Sussex claimed in her Oprah Winfrey interview had talked about how dark Archie's skin might be. She declined to say sorry for endorsing the tweet on the grounds that Prince Philip had made many racial slurs over the year. The professor also claimed the monarchy couldn't even handle a light-skinned, beautiful woman. She was the wife of a prince and was drummed out of this country by the media. One wonders why Dr. Gopal is not drummed out of Britain. It's just the benefits of immigration. They just keep accumulating. It's a gift that never stops giving, filling your country with millions of people who hate you. Oh, and in an American story, again from the Mail, 2 girls, ages 13 and 15, who were charged with the murder and carjacking of a Pakistani immigrant killed last month while working at his job delivering food in Washington, D.C., have reportedly reached a plea deal with prosecutors. Mohammed Anwar, 66, died when police said the girls, armed with a taser, sped off in his car as he clung to the driver's side with the door open and crashed seconds later, just outside the ballpark of the Washington Nationals. On Monday, the teens reportedly reached the plea deal with prosecutors that would ensure that they were not held past the age of 21 nor be placed in a prison facility. I wonder if they'll even have a criminal record. I see there is some good news here. A GoFundMe campaign was launched on behalf of the dead man's family and has raised more than $1 million to cover the costs of a funeral and to provide for his survivors. Let's go to the chat. Okay. They only require identification for activities for which integrity is important to them, says Joel Gerke. Yes, exactly. Bob Paxton says, all aboard the victim train. Alex DeLarge says, this is where I come if I want to be depressed. Oh, well, I'm sorry if it is depressing to you. That's not my intent. I would like people to be, just to take notice of, what's going on, and perhaps something can be done about it. Hello to Professor Pohl, who says, I can do post-colonial studies. The bigger the scumbag, the more moral it is to defend them. Shows your dedication to anti-judgment, says Ewan Chadwick. Morrissey didn't do it, says Bob Paxson. Balcasso 88, KMG like Burnham, hard truths, no sugar coating. There's no indication that 2020 won't be insane as well, says Alex DeLarge. Well, there has to be a limit. There has to be a limit. I think it's absolutely true. When people find out, apparently in Texas, 50,000 people, or what is it, 40,000 or whatever, can sit next to each other at a baseball game, not wearing masks, and the world doesn't come to an end. Picasso 88 says, do you see Canada's housing market crashing soon? That's an interesting question. It is very much in the interest of the government, whichever government it is, conservative government or liberal government, not to allow the bubble to pop. Because if the bubble pops, there will be quite a few Canadians who are furious because they had seen their houses as ATMs and they have instead become liabilities. Okay. Yes. Yes, they say that truth is stranger than fiction. This is from Tristan Justice at The Federalist. One Portland high school is saddled with a dilemma over whether trees are racist. Ida B. Wells Barnett High School, named after the prominent Black activist and journalist who chronicled lynching in the post-Civil War era, was supposed to vote on a new mascot Tuesday of last week, according to the Portland Tribune. The vote was postponed, however, following complaints from a board director that a change from the Trojan mascot to the Evergreens was racist. Director Michel DePass, the local Portland paper reported, said the tree mascot would invoke images of lynching. Perhaps all the trees should be cut down in America. Perhaps all the forests should be leveled, given that they are so triggering to people. The school's principal, Philip Hristic, reportedly told the board he shared DePass's concern that evergreen trees are racist. The jokes write themselves. Okay, let's get back to James Burnham. He's summing up of his book, Can Politics Be Scientific? And the book is The Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom. Fairly exact results. Oh, yes. Can politics be scientific? Because of these obstacles, which do not seem to be temporary, we should not expect too much in the way of results from political and social science. Nevertheless, such a science is not a mere theoretical possibility. We have already at our disposal a science of society, incomplete and undeveloped, no doubt, but actual. The truths so far discovered by this science are of two kinds. Fairly exact results have been obtained about problems of limited range when care is taken not to project the conclusions too far beyond the temporal and spatial boundaries within which the data have been gathered. Statistical conclusions dealing with mortality, diseases, certain economic facts, suicide, crime, literacy, trade movements all illustrate these results. They are the primary and most fruitful achievement of academic social research. At the other end, rough laws have been discovered about large-scale and long-term social and political movements. These are the achievement of, for example, and outstandingly, the Machiavellians. Many instances are given in this book. However, most of them may also be found, often somewhat differently worded, but similar in context, in the works of other social scientists from the time of Karl Marx onwards. We have available, indeed, much more knowledge about society than is ordinarily recognized, and far more than is ever used. There is a widespread misunderstanding about the nature of scientific knowledge, partly fostered by academic scientists who prefer their profession to remain an esoteric cult. The statements, for example, that bodies, when unsupported, fall toward the surface of the earth and that water runs downhill, are a long way from a mathematically formulated law of gravity. Interpreted literally, they are in fact false, as the behavior of feathers and airplanes and siphons and pumps shows. Nevertheless, they are genuinely scientific, and at a somewhat crude level of experience, they may be considered true. They are what Pareto calls first approximations, and correctly enough, generalized a vast number of observable facts. Moreover, they are very useful pieces of knowledge as guides to deliberate action. We may, on their basis, be advised to take pains to avoid a stone if we see it toppling over a building or a cliff above us, or to build a house or a village below rather than above a spring if we want the water to flow in. It would seem rather pedantic for an expert in physics to tell us first that our crude generalization about falling bodies is absolutely false, because there are facts, as there are, which disagree with it. And second, that therefore we have no right, on the basis of such falsity, to step aside from the path of the stone. This, however, is just the way that some of the academic experts reason and advise about social matters. We have at our disposal a considerable body of knowledge of this first approximation sort. One example would be the rough laws of social revolution, which we have examined in their application to the present period, or the summary list of Machiavellian principles stated at the beginning of this part, as well as innumerable applications which can be made of these principles. There is enough knowledge at hand to have enabled us to realize that the Kellogg Pact was powerless to prevent war, and that the Stimson doctrine of non-recognition of territorial changes made by force never has and never will stop changes from being made by force. Professional New York gamblers, it is interesting to note, have never since the Civil War been wrong about the outcome of a presidential election. Well, not until 2020. We know enough to be able to say now that there will almost certainly be widespread economic crisis shortly after the end of the present war, though this expectation will be carefully obscured by the parties at interest. We can predict with reasonable assurance that the public debt of this and of almost all other countries will either be repudiated outright or reduced indirectly through a lowering of interest rates, inflation, or some other similar device. Reasoning on the analogy of comparable historical periods, we may conclude that the trend away from private capitalism is irreversible. Our scientific statements about social matters must often, it is true, be put in conditional form. If other things remain the same, if such and such does not take place, then so and so will probably happen. There is, however, an implied condition in most, if not all, the statements within all the sciences. Thus, we now may know with considerable probability that if the state absorbs under centralized control all major social forces, then political liberty will disappear. If after this war, Europe is again divided into a considerable number of independently armed sovereign states, then a new war will begin in Europe within a fairly short time. If the present plan of military strategy, i.e. submarine attrition warfare and island hopping, continues unchanged in the East, then Japan will not be definitely crushed for many, many years, and perhaps never. If the present administration plans to remain in office indefinitely, that would be the Roosevelt administration, then it will have to curtail political liberty further, and so on. Such knowledge and much more is available, but not, of course, used. Well, the island hopping plan, that was MacArthur's plan. It was pretty economical in terms of lives lost as compared to the war in Europe. And of course, Roosevelt died in March 1945. I'm sure he was prepared to be president forever, notwithstanding the fact that he was as past it or more than Joe Biden is today. Burnham continues, let us turn to the second question, into which we have analyzed the general problem of science and politics. Can the masses act scientifically in political affairs? To act scientifically would mean to act logically in Pareto's sense, that is, to select consciously and deliberately real goals which are not transcendental or fanciful or impossible, and then to take practical steps which are, in fact, appropriate for reaching those goals. The goals might be peace or a higher level of material prosperity or economic equality, though conceivably they might be quite different, war or conquest or moral license. We should not make the mistake of supposing that everyone really wants the things that moralists say they ought to want. In any case, the goals would be explicit, deliberately chosen, and the actions would really achieve or at least approach the goals. This question, as Professor Dewey has often shown, is very similar to the question whether full and genuine self-government of the masses by themselves is possible. For a group to act scientifically presupposes that its decisions are reached on a democratic basis, because otherwise the decisions are not deliberate from the point of view of the group itself. In concluding that self-government of the masses is impossible, it therefore also follows that it is impossible for the masses to act scientifically in political affairs. And I will have more from James Burnham tomorrow. A piece appeared in the American Mind, March 30th. And who is it by? For some reason, yes, Helen Roy. It's at the bottom and not the top. 30, Flirty, and Not Thriving. In the spring of 2004, American sweetheart Jennifer Garner starred in 13 Going on 30. The film begins at the birthday party of freshly 13-year-old protagonist Jenna Rink. She is an awkward middle schooler who simply wants to be cute and popular. When she faces rejection from the cute and popular crowd at school because her childhood best friend, Matt, is acting like a weirdo, she hides in a closet in shame. Kicking herself, expressing hatred for Matt and for her life, Jenna wishes that she would be 30, flirty, and thriving instead of her current misery. Hilarity ensues when her wish is granted, and she is transported across 17 years to her 30-year-old life, where she is a sexpot fashion journalist in New York City. It's glamorous. There are clothing montages. Jennifer Garner, 30-year-old Jenna, is radiant. Well, to some. I never understood the cult about Jennifer Garner. She has a very harsh face, and we were supposed to admire her muscles. Why do I want a woman with muscles? Anyway, back to the story. Ultimately, Jenna comes to discover that her amazing career, apartment, and social status were possible only because she had been personally conniving and cold. She realizes she loves Matt, but he's getting married. It's too late. Magically, she returns to her 13-year-old life and, doing it over, chooses to marry him instead. As saccharine and silly as it was, the movie was a huge hit. Its influence on its target demographic, millennial women, is greatly understated. If you were 13 in 2004, you're turning 30 this year. This is true for the hosts of The Cut, a podcast from New York Magazine and Vox Media, who released an episode by the title 30, Flirty, and Thriving a few weeks ago. In it, the podcasters reflect on their perspective, shift watching the movie at 13 and now at 30. Unsurprisingly, viewers as tweens were more captivated by the film's sparkly moments than its banal message about the importance of being nice and being yourself. Avery, the main host, muses, "When I was 13, I was mostly struck by this exciting fantasy of adulthood. That was my salient takeaway. Wow, 30, flirty, and thriving. Rewatching it now, I realize I more or less forgot the middle part of the movie. The part where Jenna realizes that her older self has become a narcissistic and conniving and vindictive bitch. She has focused so narrowly on building her glamorous life that her existence is ultimately shallow and empty. Rewatching it now, I find myself wondering if the ending is actually totally at odds with the rest of the movie. In this new revised future where Matt and Jenna get married, does Jenna still work for the magazine? What about her cool career, her experimental wardrobe, all the parties? That was all the fun stuff in the movie, all the stuff I wanted 30 to be, that I still want 30 to be. I want all the exciting, thrilling parts without being selfish and shallow. I don't know if this is truly possible. It's something I lose sleep over. It's been happening more and more recently. Every time I hear about another friend getting engaged or buying a house or having a kid, and one of these milestones that just seems eons away from where I'm at, it just makes me think, am I the bad Jenna? Will I also suddenly look back at my shallow life full of regret, and will it be too late? I know it's a movie. It's just a movie. It's just a movie." Another host goes on to mention, "My 30th birthday was really sad. I really wanted it to be 13 going on 30 themed, but it happened during COVID and was just so womp womp. It was the moment. It was almost like day and night that my mom started pushing me about kids." Like Jenna Rink, millennials prioritize the superficial markers of achievement while disparaging the idea of marrying or having children in their 20s. Unlike Jenna Rink, they will not be able to turn back time and marry their first love or have his babies when they realize what they've sacrificed, knowingly or not. For the women who internalized the phrase 30, flirty, and thriving as tweens, biology is beginning to butt heads with myth. Geriatric infertility, the standard female experience, save some divine intervention, is a hard, cold truth. But the millennial still believes that she may kick that can down the road indefinitely, even as her body betrays her. How deeply unfair that the second speaker would be surprised by this type of question from her mother. The subject of getting pregnant is only broached as it becomes a matter of now or never, not a moment before. Why is this? Why are the girls of this generation so deeply ignorant about their own bodies? Where is the millennial's mother? And why won't she tell her daughter what's next? This is one of the quiet tragedies of feminism and modernity, the disappearance of intergenerational female friendship. We are now reaping the bitter rewards of a total failure of older American women to convey the inescapable reality of female biology to their daughters and granddaughters. Instead of roadmaps corresponding to reality, millennials were silently handed birth control and college applications. Screens took care of the rest. The transvaluation of femininity on the altar of material consumption has normalized a profound lack of charity between women that has been disastrous for us all. As television filmed the vacuum where the wisdom of older women once provided a practical, long-view sexual education, it filled the heads of the children it raised with delusions of grandeur. Because of programs like 13 Going on 30, as well as Sex and the City, Secret Life of the American Teenager, and Teen Mom, a new culture of shame emerged around youth and fertility. You'd have to be crazy, dysfunctional, low IQ, or low status to sacrifice the glamour of independent urban decadence represented by the first two, for the catastrophic humility represented by the latter. The way women raised on a steady diet of anti-natalist programming treat other women who marry and have children during their most fertile years, between the ages of 16 to 25, is how I imagine women used to treat homewreckers, with a great deal of shame and judgment commingled with performative pity. The given reason is that she, the childbearer, has squandered her elusive economic potential. We regard young women with babies the same way we regard young men with face tattoos. What a dramatic lapse in judgment. What a waste. She becomes an outcast, an alien to the girls she once knew as friends. For women especially, shame is a powerful deterrent. We are learning now that parents who outsource moral instruction to the television never become grandparents. In other words, this problem of disappearing parents emerges from a problem of negligent parents. No one was brave or honest enough to tell millennial girls that life isn't like the movies. A significant chunk of these women will soon pass the point of no return for having kids, and they will face a litany of cascading social and emotional consequences of a lie long believed, namely loneliness. Put simply, millennials are about to learn the hard way that this cost of endless flirting and thriving is biological denialism, and the cost of biological denialism is death. Yes, I remember on the HBO drama Veep, Armando Iannucci's show, that we're introduced to a attractive young woman played by Emma Chlumsky, who is a senior advisor, Amy Brookhiser, to the Vice President of the United States. And I won't say how we got to this point. It's complicated in any event. She is spotted in a drugstore buying birth testing kits by her rival, Dan, who is just completely floored by the prospect that Amy might be pregnant. And he says, "You're pregnant? Do you know what that will do to your career? What are you going to do next? Get a face tattoo or join Scientology?" Yes, this hatred of young women becoming pregnant, delivering children, is real. And it just, so many women now seem to take this as a personal affront, where it's really none of their business, actually. Aquino Cure is an interesting blogger, sort of an amateur social scientist. He has something to say about models, that they seem to have disappeared. The models used to be famous. He writes songs about the industry appeared earlier in the heyday, circa 1980. The Model by Kraftwerk, Fashion by David Bowie, Girls on Film by Duran Duran, and two songs from the 90s called Supermodel, one by RuPaul and another by Jill Solbuhl for the Clueless soundtrack. The death of models has been discussed for at least a decade now, and he refers to an old post looking at the generational aspects of its decline, whereby Gen Xers were the most suited to being models, whether they were teenagers or 30-somethings, and across various time periods from the early 90s to the late 2000s. Millennials never took over. The last two supermodels were Gisele Bündchen and Alessandra Ambrosio, born in 1980 and 81. Emily Ratajkowski is not a model, but someone who could have been a model if she'd been born 10 years earlier. She is that hot chick from the Blurred Lines music video who has appeared in the zombie runway shows for zombie fashion brands and zombie publications, like the Sports Illustrated Swimsuit edition. For a while now, pop culture celebs have taken over for models. Actresses, singers, hot chicks from music videos, etc. They've so run out of ideas, they've so reduced themselves to getting politicians like AOC on magazine covers and resorted to generic libtard journos blabbing about her white capelet as though they were visually talented and specialized in fashion rather than politics. We saw this over the weekend with the Vice President of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden, who was wearing, fishnet pantyhose, fishnet, and boots with spiked heels. Perhaps she thinks she's being 30 and flirty. Yes, and of course, as mentioned earlier, Lena Dunham has been on the cover of Vogue. Desecration, I suppose. I have an explanation for this, actually, that models are no longer used because an excess of secular democracy, a term I coined. You see, models, the classic American models, were beautiful. And beauty is not democratic. Beauty is a gift of God. And it is now, beauty is resented now. It is outright hated, actually, because it's not really something that one can aspire to. One either has it or one doesn't. And that is seen to be unfair, inequitable, I suppose we would say now. Let's go back to the chat. Gandalf White II says, IG is a sewer, though Playboy has trans models now. So can't even like that. Sometimes I wonder whether anyone modeling on IG is the gender they present themselves as. Well, see, fashion designers like models to be like coat racks. In the 1980s and 90s, you had full-figured models, but then the homosexuals who run the fashion industry decided that no, the dresses, they don't, the gowns, they don't flow properly with full-figured women. So let's have androgynous 14-year-olds as models now. Tom Anderson says, Truman Capote said that Americans hate beauty because beauty is anti-egalitarian. I don't want to be an insect person, says Hikmah Warrior. I refuse. Oh, no, I'm not going to read that. Oh, dear. Why do you suppose homosexual fashion designers would want women with bodies like 10-year-old boys, says respectable commenting name? Yes, the fashion industry run by leathery women and feathery men. But yes, the whole point of Aquino Curia's essay was that the fashion industry now appears to be moribund. Don from Beyond says, my stupid county school system has just begun a alphabet people curriculum, which begins in elementary school. Please, please, please. No comments about pornography. I beg you. Lena is a supermodel now, says Bob Paxson. Well, I mean, she's not fooling anybody. She's really not fooling anybody. I wonder about that boyfriend she had, the songwriter. This is a fellow who he writes hit songs. And if you write hit songs today, women singers are throwing themselves at you. And somehow this fellow ended up with Lena Dunham. It was very strange. Logan's Run had it right, says Bob Paxson. Yeah, the first half of that movie is good. The second half, particularly with overacting by Peter Ustinov, second half is no good. Enjoy your youth. Getting old sucks in most respects, says Hikmah Warrior. Well, Muriel Spark, who I mentioned earlier, once said that being old is better than growing old. Gandalf White II says, I'm grieving baseball now. This is directed at Ricardo Williams. It's officially totally lost to wokeism. Gandalf White says, I'm pissed that they canceled the first series of Mets Nationals for the COOF and after the Atlanta All-Star kerfuffle. This is the first MLB season I haven't cared. Yeah, it's not, Michael Jordan once famously said that he didn't speak about politics because Republicans buy running shoes too. There's a lot of wisdom there. Okay. So, oh yes, I was greatly amused at over the weekend. There's a strange hashtag trending on Twitter, and I'll just bring it up here. I will no longer apologize for. Yes, because that's how we can detect young people because they're always, admitting their mistakes. They're always promising to do better. A whole bunch of people said that they were no longer going to apologize for, being obsessed with Harry Potter. I think the mockery has come home to them. Does love reading for myself, basically gets told to stop being a clingy bitch and get hold of yourself, drinks coffee and sulks in truth. This is someone called Delicate Flower, self-described as Giant of Jiggle, producer of Purple Nightshade Productions, Weirdo Queerdo. Yes, she sounds like the whole package. Does she not? I will no longer apologize for using the double gulp cup for the Slurpee. Oh, okay. That's a thing. Is it? I will no longer. This is from Jacob Allen, formerly Megadog. I'm a gamer, blogger, artist, and aspiring singer. I put my friends first and everyone else second. Says, I will no longer apologize being a 32-year-old dude who loves Sailor Moon, My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, and Winx Club. Yeah. Forewarned is forearmed, as they say. I will no longer apologize for being excited by things other people might think are silly or childish. This is from Order Rodentia, self-described as rat slave, amateur rodent aficionado, American culture MA, history BA nerd, loves history, animals, space, writing, books, Star Trek. Well, you know my advice, don't you? Never trust a woman who describes herself as a nerd. So I think I'm going to move on to Music Monday. And I'm going to talk about one of my favorite composers, Hugo Wolf, who was born in 1860 and who died in 1903. In terms of, we started the show with talking about, what kind of music is going to be listened to 200 years in the future. Well, when Hugo Wolf died in 1903, I don't think there'd be many people who would have bet on his prospects because he was little known when he died. In fact, he was almost forgotten. But there is a cult of Hugo Wolf, and there are many records by him available, and I will talk about them a little later. He grew up in the Austrian Empire, what is now Slovenia, in a town which was called Vindišgrad in Styria, and it has a Slovenian name now, which I'm Slovenj I'm probably mispronouncing that. I looked up Vindišgrad, and there is much handsome architecture in the place. Wolf was a exceedingly passionate man, and it cost him. He loved to love things, and he studied at the Vienna Conservatory. He entered the same year as Gustav Mahler. Mahler later dismissed him, saying, I'm not interested in Hugo Wolf and his 1,000 songs. Well, actually, Wolf wrote about 300 and something. Gustav Mahler was not particularly nice man. Wolf was kicked out of the conservatory after 2 years. I guess he was, shooting his mouth off. Wolf fell in love with Richard Wagner to the extent that he became, in the War of the Romantics, one of the main cheerleaders for Wagner and Bruckner and Liszt, and one of the chief denigrators of Johannes Brahms. Again, I said before, I don't see why it is not possible to love both Brahms and Wagner. I know that Arnold Schoenberg certainly did. Uh, Wolf, he was committed to making a career in music, but he worked as a teacher, and he worked as a critic for the Wiener Zahlenblatt, and he caused he hurt himself. His critical efforts very much damaged any attempt to have certainly any orchestral pieces by him performed. He loved Wagner so much that when he would return the first time after he'd heard Wagner, he returned to his boyhood home in Slovenia and played from memory the Wagner opera that he had heard, and he played it with such vehemence that he destroyed the piano. Wolf was disappointed in love, and I suppose one of the reasons for this is that probably around the age of 20, he acquired syphilis, which was a plague and remained a plague until the invention of antibiotics. Syphilis was at the time a death sentence, although there is some controversy about this. Syphilis was, for the longest time, treated with mercury, which is a deadly poison, and that there are some that believe that it was the treatment of syphilis that was actually worse than the disease. Hugo Wolf, I spoke, about syphilis, that a famous impresario once joked that Brahms was not a great songwriter because he did not have syphilis, unlike, say, Schumann and probably Schubert as well. Now, the fellow that I was talking about, the impresario, was the husband of Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, and he was a producer for EMI. And Elizabeth Schwarzkopf is rather central to the reputation that Walter Legg was his name. And Walter Legg organized in the 1930s a subscription to have Wolf's songs sung by the greatest male and female singers in the world. So we have Walter Legg to thank for that. I suppose Wolf's the chromaticism of Wolf's work, they did not find favor with all. The acolytes of Wagner. Their music was considered by a great many, certainly by the conservatives, to be unlistenable. Even the great Hungarian-American conductor George Szell came across Schwarzkopf when she was recording works by Hugo Wolf in the late 1960s, and he rebuked her for doing this, saying that Wolf was not music. One of the things that distinguishes Hugo Wolf from other songwriters, creators of what the Germans call Kunstlied, art song, is how very particular he was in the choice of the poets that he set to music. Wolf set many different poets to music. He set a lot of poems by Goethe to music, some of his greatest and most popular songs. And also Eichendorff, Joseph von Eichendorff. But the poet that is most associated with Hugo Wolf was a Lutheran pastor from Swabia, and his name was Eduard Murica. And I suppose that it is just solely because of Hugo Wolf that Murica's work was not forgotten. Again, this question, Murica died in 1875, this question of, who will be remembered in the future? Well, again, we don't know. But Miraca is still read today because of Hugo Wolf's love of his poetry. Miraca led rather a sad life, which is expressed in his poems, although many of them are cheery. A great variety that one finds in Miraca's work. My favorite of his poems is in the English. It's called Reclusion, and it expresses Miraca's belief that he will remain alone, that he will never find a soulmate. I guess you could say, Alas, o Welt, o lass mich sein, locket nicht mit Liebesgaben, lass dies Herz alleinen haben, seine Wohner, seine Pein. Yes. Hugo Wolf wrote orchestral works as well. Of course, the difficulty in writing orchestral works for him was that you would need an orchestra to play them. And Wolf was, informed in no uncertain terms that the Via Philharmonic was never going to perform any of his works. So to the extent that Wolf made any money from music, it was from his songs, which, of course, all you need is a singer and a piano. And I want to talk about, why do I love Hugo Wolf so much? Well, I suppose the tragedy of his life appeals to me. He went mad in 1897 due to syphilis, and he was put in an asylum. He was thought to get better, and he was released, and then he tried to drown himself, I guess like Schumann, and spent the remaining years of his life in a lunatic asylum. And he played one piece over and over again, which is Beethoven's 27th piano sonata in E minor, opus 90. It's a short piano sonata. It doesn't have the heroic quality of other Beethoven works, but it is a beautiful piece, and it is certainly my favorite of his sonatas. I particularly like a version by Wilhelm Kempff, which you can find on YouTube. You can find a great amount of Hugo Wolf on YouTube. I suppose I'm attracted to the Hugo Wolf story because, again, it seems to point to the belief that virtue, or at least virtue in art, will be rewarded. The two singers most associated with Hugo Wolf are Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau and Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, as mentioned earlier. And Fischer-Dieskau did several surveys of Wolf's songs. He's also conducted his orchestral work. Listeners may have heard of Wolf's Italian Serenade, which was supposed to be a quartet. He orchestrated it later, but he only finished the first part. Unfortunately, it's not one of the pieces that you hear in symphony concerts for the reason that it's too short. Because typically you get what? You get 3 pieces now, or 2 pieces in a symphony concert. I can recommend a box from Warner Classics, where you get an 8 CD survey of Hugo Wolf, including such worthies as Schwarzkopf and Fischer-Dieskau, Olaf Barr, Anna Sophie von Otter, Ian Bostridge, Thomas Allen, Gerald Moore, Helmut Deutsch, Antonio Pappano, and Jeffrey Parsons. I guess Ian Bostridge would be supposed to be the greatest living champion of Wolf's work. Of course, Antonio Pappano acts as accompanist. He's a famed conductor as well. It seems that every generation finds its new champions of Hugo Wolf. So you get pretty much everything in this box, and it can get it from Amazon for only $35. There's also a survey. Fisher Dieskau did 2 surveys of Woolf's work, one for EMI, which is now one of classics, with the great Gerald Moore, and the second with the great Daniel Barenboim. Woolf, he wrote songs based on Goethe's, how is this pronounced, Westlicher Divan, which is a series of poems that are satirical of Islam. And I just thought it was just a matter of time before they are canceled for that reason. But you can get this survey, again, for $30 at Amazon. I'm going to talk in a few weeks about classical record collecting. This is the best time in history to collect recorded classical music, for the reason that the record companies have so much in the catalog, and of course they're constantly bringing out new recordings, that they sell box sets, which are just tremendous values. If you get 8 CDs for $35, that's what? Well, $4.50 a CD, and you can get them even if you buy bigger collections. You can get them even cheaper. There are fine collections available of his Italian leader book and a Spanish songbook as well. There are historical works by him. I suppose if you wanted to start with Hugo Wolf, of course there's YouTube, as I say, but I suppose I could recommend as a single disc introduction is a live recording which was made by Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau and the great Soviet pianist Sviatoslav Richter. That would be a good place to start. So those are my thoughts on Hugo Wolf. Let's see. Hickman Warrior says German said high regard for Persian literature and poetry, actually. Ogan's Iron said previous job dressed higher end of business casual, so I got to wear my sports jacket. Current job is more IT culture, very low dress standards. I feel weird wearing a jacket. Dress used to express class divisions, but it hardly does anymore. I've been thinking this about a lot because, as I walk the streets, it used to be that you could look at the way that a man was dressed, and, if he was dressed like this, it would be reasonable to assume that he would not represent any kind of threat to you. But I noticed that with rare exceptions, men, when I see them out on the streets, they look like the shattered remnants of a defeated army. Gandalf White, too, says Germans, even compared to Slavs, have always had a pretty authentic Orientalism that was respectful of the many cultures in Asia and Africa. Goethe's poems are, they're good-natured joshery, really. I don't know. I suppose, Muslims are going to be offended by them. But they're not mean-spirited. Okay. Let's see. What do we have? Okay, we're talking about different types of peoples here. Hugo Wolf and Friedrich Nietzsche both died from complications from syphilis. Yes, indeed. Just an explanation for that. I suppose most of you won't need an explanation. That before, the 1970s, say, sex outside of marriage was dangerous. One did not, I suppose, in Bohemia, men and women had sexual relations without being married. But this was, it was heavily criticized, looked down upon. One would suffer if this was found out. So men would either arrange clandestine rendezvous with married women, or they would frequent whorehouses, and at these whorehouses, syphilis was dispersed. Okay, what are we going to be talking about later in the week? Coming up, well, next week on Music Monday, I am going to be discussing krautrock, a primer. I know Professor Paul is looking forward to that. At first, there were people who thought that the name krautrock, I believe that was coined either by Melody Maker or the New Musical Express. It was seen to be insulting, but it's considered, a neutral term now. Kraftwerk they seem to be bemused by the fact that they went to America, that, these are musicians, pop musicians who are German. And, they were always being asked about Nazis and the like, and they really couldn't understand it. On the book club on Friday, I'm going to be talking about a dystopian thriller set in the year 2021. It is called The Children of Men by P.D. James. Oh, and by the way, the movie pretty much takes the novel and turns it upside down. A pretty arresting beginning to that novel. From a diary, Friday, January 1st, 2021. Early this morning, the 1st of January 2021, 3 minutes after midnight, the last human being to be born on Earth was killed in a pub brawl. And on Theater Thursday, April the 8th, I'm going to be discussing a movie from 2019, a strange, moody, mysterious movie called The Vast of Night by Andrew Patterson. So that's it for today. Thank you all for listening and watching. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, much appreciated, particularly at this juncture in my life. My PayPal account is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations can be made directly to the show via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social isolation and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.